Was Meghan Markle's latest Harper's Bazaar interview carefully staged, or a full-blown diva meltdown? That question alone is enough to make anyone stop scrolling. For weeks, rumors had swirled around Meghan's upcoming Harper's Bazaar feature, teasing yet another intimate glimpse into her life. But what unfolded behind the glossy pages and polished camera angles was far more sensational than anyone could have imagined. Sources claim that while the public saw a calm, poised Duchess making jam and discussing her so-called brave life choices, the backstage reality was a completely different story, one that even the editor-in-chief herself, Samira Nasser, described as shocking, chaotic, and in some ways, staged. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine this. A room barely large enough to hold a few staff members, lights blazing, cameras set, makeup artists hovering over every angle, and in the center, Meghan Markle. She is announced to the room as though entering a royal palace for a coronation. One person in the room, literally one staffer besides the camera crew, is there to greet her, yet the flourish, the ceremony, the fanfare, is out of proportion to the space, the situation, and the stakes. For viewers on the outside, it looks elegant, charming, carefully orchestrated, and almost whimsical. For those inside, it was confusing, intimidating, and bordering on absurd. It's one of those moments that makes you wonder, is this bravado? Is this performance? Or is it a sign of something far deeper? A meticulously constructed persona that eclipses the simple act of an interview? And then there was the jam. A seemingly mundane domestic act transformed into a moment of bravery in Meghan's narrative. She recounted, with a slight smile and dramatic pause, the effort it took to make jam, a metaphor, she implied, for resilience, courage, and self-determination. Yet those on the inside saw something else. They saw meticulous staging, strategic camera angles, and repeated takes that transformed what could have been a candid, light-hearted vignette into a carefully curated spectacle. One might even argue that the glamour of the moment overshadowed the act itself. But why? Why would a simple task, a culinary moment, require such attention, such drama, such theatricality? This is the question that would haunt the staff members, editors, and production crew for hours after the interview concluded. And it's precisely the question Samira Nasser, Harper's Bazaar's editor-in-chief, would later answer in a shocking behind-the-scenes revelation. Before we get there, though, it's important to understand the context. Meghan Markle's media appearances have always been carefully scrutinized, dissected, and sometimes sensationalized. But this interview was different. Unlike the countless television segments, magazine covers, and carefully staged royal events, this was a one-on-one, intimate chat that promised insight. Yet the reality, as described by those present, was a tangled web of demands, preparation, tension, and spectacle that stretched far beyond what appeared in print. Staff members who had worked with numerous celebrities over the years admitted they had never seen anything like it. Even Samira Nasser, whose role is to navigate the delicate balance between celebrity narratives and editorial integrity, found herself confronted with moments of unpredictability, frustration, and yes, even awe. Let's start with the day itself. Early in the morning, the production crew arrived at the location, which was carefully selected to project an air of cozy domesticity. The room had been curated with deliberate attention, neutral tones, subtle lighting, props strategically placed to reinforce Meghan's personal brand of warmth, sophistication, and relatability. Staffers meticulously arranged everything down to the last teacup, ensuring that nothing would look out of place on camera. Yet even before the cameras started rolling, Meghan had begun issuing requests. Some were reasonable, some slightly peculiar, and others, by many accounts, crossed into what could only be described as diva territory. Adjust the lighting, move the flowers, reposition the chair by 2 inches, small adjustments on the surface, but indicative of a level of control that bordered on obsessive precision. These demands weren't casual suggestions. They were directives delivered with a tone that left little room for discussion. Samira Nasser, who had spent years in high-profile editorial environments, initially attempted to accommodate these requests with calm professionalism. After all, this is part of working with A-list figures. Public perception is everything, and a magazine feature like this could define reputations and sales. But what followed quickly escalated beyond expectation. According to insiders, what seemed like minor adjustments became an extended sequence of meticulous positioning, repeated takes, and sometimes sudden interruptions in workflow. The staff were left balancing the fine line between respect for a high-profile interviewee and the logistical demands of producing a polished editorial product. Each new adjustment added pressure, tension mounting as the minutes ticked by toward the moment the cameras would actually roll. And then came the announcement. Meghan was ushered into the room with deliberate flourish, as if entering a palace ceremony rather than a modest interview setting. The one staffer present gave a polite greeting, and the room, dimly lit, soft jazz playing faintly in the background, became a stage for a performance that would be dissected in magazines, online forums, and social media posts for weeks. The juxtaposition was stark: a small room, minimal audience, yet a regal introduction. It raised eyebrows, elicited quiet murmurs from the crew, and planted the seeds of what would later be described as a staged spectacle. The jam-making episode deserves special attention. Meghan spoke of it as a brave act, a metaphor for her life, resilience, and independence. The cameras captured her smiling, stirring the mixture, occasionally looking up with a reflective gaze. Yet behind the scenes, the process was far from spontaneous. According to sources, multiple takes were conducted, angles were repositioned, and props rearranged repeatedly to create the perfect visual narrative. It was no longer about making jam. It was about creating an image, a story, and a carefully controlled message to the public. Observers noted the contrast. What seemed casual, even intimate, to the audience was in reality a highly choreographed event. There was humor in the absurdity of it all. Staffers whispered about the irony of orchestrating a simple kitchen task with the intensity of a royal coronation rehearsal. As the interview progressed, these tensions persisted. Samira Nasser later revealed that she found herself in the unusual position of simultaneously directing editorial content, managing behind-the-scenes logistics, and navigating a series of demands that tested her patience. The narrative of Meghan as composed and relatable began to blur with reports of impatience, sudden mood shifts, and carefully staged theatrics. Sources describe moments when Meghan would pause, review a scene, request another take, and then re-engage with a smile that masked what was reportedly an intense, private frustration. It was the duality of her public persona versus private actions that made the situation so extraordinary. By the time the cameras finally stopped rolling, the staff were exhausted, the editors were emotionally spent, and Samira Nasser had witnessed moments that would later become the backbone of her leaked revelations. For those watching from the outside, it seemed like another carefully polished, charming interview. For those inside, it was a masterclass in control, image-making, and theatricality, punctuated by moments of tension, humor, and sheer disbelief. But what truly made this story explode was the leak itself. Samira Nasser, reflecting on the day, decided to speak candidly about the discrepancies between what was seen by the public and what actually occurred behind closed doors. She revealed diva-like behavior, the strategic staging, and moments of frustration that were never intended for the public eye. It was a revelation that challenged not only the public perception of Meghan, but also the integrity of celebrity journalism. The editor's voice carried weight. She had managed countless interviews, yet she had never encountered anything quite like this. And so, as the Harper's Bazaar feature made its rounds, public fascination collided with backstage chaos. Headlines hailed Meghan's bravery, charm, and domestic creativity. Social media users marveled at the simplicity of making jam as a profound life lesson. Yet behind every polished frame and curated moment, the truth, chaotic, dramatic, and, according to insiders, staged, lurked in shadows. How much of what we saw was real, and how much was performance? How far do celebrities go to craft a narrative, and what toll does it take on the people trying to make that narrative happen? The answer, as Samira Nasser would later reveal, is far from simple. It's a tale of control, image, human psychology, and the lengths one person can go to shape perception. And it's just the beginning. Behind every smile, every perfectly stirred spoon, and every dramatic pause, there were layers of orchestrated decisions, unspoken tension, and quiet moments of disbelief. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Before the cameras even rolled, the stage was set, but not for the story the public would see. It was for something far more dramatic, something only those backstage could truly comprehend. It all began hours before Meghan Markle would step into the small, meticulously prepared room for her Harper's Bazaar interview. The staff had been briefed days in advance, schedules coordinated with military-like precision, and props. Each piece of furniture, each teacup, each jar of jam had been arranged to perfection. On the surface, it seemed like a standard editorial shoot. But as any seasoned magazine professional knows, the surface can be deceptive. What you see is never the full story. And for the Harper's Bazaar team, this particular morning would quickly reveal just how much of an illusion normal could be. Early that day, production crew members arrived to find the space bathed in a soft, golden light, curtains pulled to let in the perfect amount of natural glow, and subtle background music set at a precise decibel to evoke calm focus. Everything was calibrated to the exact specifications listed in the pre-interview brief. But that brief had only gone so far. Staffers soon realized that Meghan herself had additional, highly specific instructions that had not been documented anywhere. Adjust the lighting by half a degree to better highlight the cheekbones. Move the chair 2 inches closer to the table. Ensure the jam jar's label faced a specific angle toward the camera lens. These demands were minor on paper, but the implications were massive. Each request disrupted schedules, testing patience and forcing staff to adapt instantly. Samira Nasser, the editor-in-chief, arrived shortly after the crew. As someone used to managing high-profile interviews and difficult celebrities, she had a reputation for calm professionalism. She had faced demanding stars, eccentric directors, and temperamental photographers, but nothing quite prepared her for what unfolded that morning. As soon as she entered the room, she noticed a subtle shift in the staff's demeanor. Tension hidden behind smiles, whispered exchanges, and quick glances toward the clock. The air was charged with anticipation, yet a strange undercurrent of anxiety had already begun to ripple through the team. Meghan arrived shortly thereafter. Her entrance was anything but subtle. Even in a room with only a handful of people, she was introduced with a fanfare that seemed designed for a palace ballroom. One staffer, the only person aside from the camera crew, greeted her with polite formality, yet Meghan's grand announcement to the room created a dissonance that left everyone momentarily bewildered. It was, in the words of several staff members later interviewed, over the top for a one-person audience, and yet it set the tone for the entire day. From the very first minute, it was clear that this interview would be less about candid conversation and more about controlled spectacle. Almost immediately, the requests began. Meghan directed subtle adjustments, from the placement of props to the positioning of staff. Every decision carried weight, and every request was delivered with a sense of authority that left little room for discussion. Some were easy to accommodate, minor tweaks that fit seamlessly into the workflow. Others, however, required staff to halt their progress, reposition equipment, and, in some cases, rethink entire sequences. The jam-making scene alone became a series of strategic negotiations, where the timing, camera angles, and even Meghan's hand placement were adjusted repeatedly. Humor and irony emerged in small, whispered moments. One staff member later described holding a teacup in exactly the correct spot, only to be asked to move it slightly to the left, then a little more, then back again. The absurdity of orchestrating such precision for what appeared to be a simple, everyday task became a running joke among the team. But it was also exhausting. Each adjustment carried unspoken pressure. Make a mistake, and you could face frustration or criticism. Perform perfectly, and your work remained invisible, absorbed into the illusion that Meghan herself had created. Tension mounted as the clock ticked closer to the start of filming. Samira Nasser, juggling her responsibilities as editor-in-chief, mediator, and crisis manager, had to navigate the delicate balance between accommodating Meghan's requests and maintaining professional integrity. It was a high-wire act. Allow too many disruptions, and the production schedule could spiral out of control. Push back and risk confrontation. Sources later described moments where Samira considered stepping away entirely, only to remind herself that this was her job. to manage the story, the star, and the team simultaneously. By mid-morning, the team had settled into a rhythm of organized chaos. Meghan's requests, though frequent and sometimes surprising, became predictable in their unpredictability, a paradoxical form of control. Staffers adapted, anticipating the next adjustment before it was even articulated. And yet, every decision she made carried an emotional undertone. A subtle demand for recognition, a quiet assertion of authority, or a strategic move designed to ensure that the final product matched her public persona. Behind every smile, every measured gesture, there was calculation. Behind every pause, every glance at the camera, there was an awareness of how perception shapes narrative. Even small moments became charged with meaning. When Meghan moved a chair closer to the table, it wasn't just furniture. It was a statement about proximity, presence, and how she wished to be seen. When she paused to consider lighting adjustments, it wasn't merely aesthetic, it was control over how the world would perceive her composure and poise. Staffers described these interactions as a mix of awe, frustration, and subtle admiration. The duality was palpable. On one hand, they were exasperated by the meticulousness. On the other, they recognized the genius of crafting an image that could captivate millions. The pre-interview hours also revealed underlying dynamics within the team. Staff members whispered about the challenges of balancing professionalism with the eccentricities of high-profile talent. Some admitted that moments of panic or doubt arose. Would they meet expectations? Could they adapt fast enough? Was the narrative unfolding as intended, or would it unravel under the weight of constant adjustments? These questions, unspoken yet pressing, added another layer of tension to the day. And then there was the subtle interplay between reality and performance. Every instruction, every repositioning, every minute adjustment contributed to a narrative that the public would never see. The room, the props, the interactions, all were part of a carefully curated illusion designed to reinforce Meghan's brand. Relatable, poised, and courageous. Yet the staff experienced the truth behind the curtain. A calculated, sometimes demanding, sometimes theatrical, effort to create a flawless image. It was the tension between public narrative and backstage reality that made the day extraordinary, surreal, and, according to insiders, unforgettable. Even small details, like the precise placement of a jar of jam or the way Meghan's hands rested on the table, were not trivial. Each movement was intentional, each pause deliberate. Staffers noted how a seemingly minor adjustment could cause a ripple effect throughout the setup, requiring a cascade of changes across lighting, camera angles, and audio. These small but significant disruptions became a test of patience, precision, and professionalism. Yet they also underscored a key point. Nothing was left to chance. Every moment was designed to be visually perfect, emotionally resonant, and narratively compelling. By the time filming was set to begin, the atmosphere in the room was a mixture of excitement, tension, and anticipation. Everyone knew that what would appear in the glossy pages of Harper's Bazaar was only a fraction of what had transpired. The public would see a poised, elegant, and relatable Meghan Markle. The staff would remember a meticulous, demanding, and surprisingly theatrical individual, navigating a complex interplay of image, perception, and control. And the editor-in-chief, Samira Nasser, would later reveal just how much of what seemed spontaneous was carefully orchestrated, and just how much chaos had unfolded behind the camera. But what came next, the actual moment when Meghan stepped in front of the camera, would change everything. What seemed like a simple interview was about to become a stage for behavior, demands, and surprises that no one could have anticipated. The calm, polished surface was about to crack, revealing layers of tension, drama, and performance that would leave both staff and the public questioning what was real, what was staged, and what it truly means to command attention on the world stage. And in that moment, just as the lights focused and the cameras began rolling, it became clear. The story that would make headlines was not the one that had been planned. What came next would shock everyone. And backstage insiders knew it long before the public ever saw a single frame. Even the seasoned editor couldn't believe what happened next. Those words, later spoken by Samira Nasser herself, set the tone for what would become one of the most controversial behind-the-scenes revelations in celebrity interview history. For someone who had orchestrated countless high-profile shoots, managed temperamental stars, and navigated the complexities of editorial integrity, the events of that day went far beyond the ordinary. It wasn't just the demands, the staging, or the chaos. It was the sheer unpredictability, the contradictions, and the subtle manipulations that left even the most experienced professionals stunned. The first red flag appeared almost immediately after Meghan entered the room. While the announcement and grand entrance had already signaled a level of theatricality, the way Meghan interacted with the production staff was telling. She would issue instructions with a calm, composed tone, almost conversational at first, only to escalate in intensity if her expectations were not met exactly. It was a pattern described by multiple staffers. Soft command, subtle insistence, then firm insistence if corrections weren't applied. To an outsider, it might have looked like simple professionalism, but to those in the room, it was a delicate dance, a test of patience, and a subtle demonstration of control. Samira Nasser quickly noticed the challenge of balancing editorial responsibilities with the need to accommodate Meghan's precise demands. Each request, no matter how small, created a ripple effect across the production. Adjusting the lighting, moving props, repositioning chairs, all while maintaining continuity and preparing the crew, was an extraordinary juggling act. For Samira, it was a test of both skill and stamina. Every time she thought the room had settled into a rhythm, another instruction or modification would emerge, sometimes contradicting previous adjustments. The constant shift created an atmosphere of tension and heightened awareness, where even minor missteps were magnified. One of the earliest red flags involved a seemingly minor instruction about the placement of a table centerpiece. Meghan requested that it be moved slightly to the right of its original position. The crew complied, but she quickly asked for a second adjustment, citing a slight change in the camera angle. What should have been a brief repositioning turned into a meticulous exercise, requiring recalibration of lighting and camera focus. For Samira, it was the first indication that what appeared casual on the surface was anything but. Each request carried weight, precision, and an expectation of immediate execution. Humor and irony were not absent from the proceedings. Staffers later recounted how repeated adjustments for trivial details became a running joke, albeit a tense one. Whispered comments about the tyranny of the teacup and the drama of the doily circulated among the team. Yet beneath the humor was a tangible sense of pressure. The stakes were enormous, not just for the image being crafted, but for the professional reputation of everyone involved. Samira recognized the challenge: maintain composure, deliver results, and navigate what was increasingly becoming a psychological maze. As the preparations continued, more subtle red flags emerged, revealing layers of calculated behavior and strategic positioning. Meghan's interactions with the crew displayed a deep awareness of power dynamics. She would make suggestions framed as casual questions, but with an undertone that left little room for dissent. She would pause, observe reactions, and adjust her instructions based on subtle cues: timing, eye contact, body language. Observers described these moments as a blend of charm and quiet intimidation, a combination that kept the staff alert, responsive, and occasionally on edge. Samira Nasser, trained to anticipate challenges and mediate difficult situations, found herself in unfamiliar territory. She was accustomed to managing ego, yet Meghan's control was layered, nuanced, and calculated. It wasn't just about issuing commands. It was about shaping perception, orchestrating narrative, and subtly directing the emotional tone of the room. The staff responded accordingly, careful, precise, aware of every movement and instruction. For Samira, each interaction became a test of judgment: when to comply, when to assert editorial authority, and when to observe quietly. Another red flag came when Meghan reviewed the initial camera angles. She suggested subtle changes that seemed innocuous on the surface but required extensive adjustments behind the scenes. Lighting rigs were repositioned, reflectors moved, and even minor modifications in sound placement were requested. What struck Samira and the crew was the precision of these demands. They were meticulous, intentional, and strategic. It wasn't improvisation. It was control exercised with foresight, shaping not only the visual narrative but also the emotional resonance of the final product. As the morning progressed, the accumulation of these small, precise instructions began to create strain. Staffers admitted feeling a mix of admiration and exasperation. On one hand, they were witnessing a masterclass in personal branding, image management, and media strategy. On the other hand, the intensity of attention to minor details created moments of doubt and tension. How far would the demands go? How much was necessary for the narrative being constructed, and how much was ego, theatrics, or a display of power? These questions lingered, unanswered but pervasive, shaping every interaction in the room. The tension reached a pivotal moment when a small issue regarding the positioning of a prop escalated. Meghan's attention to detail, combined with her awareness of how it would appear on camera, led to a situation where multiple adjustments were required in quick succession. The staff worked diligently, yet the repeated changes created subtle friction. Samira observed the reactions carefully. Some staffers masked their frustration with professionalism, others whispered about the absurdity of the situation, and one nearly voiced outright exasperation. For an editor used to maintaining calm, the challenge was unprecedented: how to navigate the demands without disrupting the morale, rhythm, or schedule. Humor, as always, existed in quiet moments, often in contrast to the high stakes. Staffers would exchange glances, chuckle softly at the repeated small adjustments, or joke about the theater of it all. Yet beneath the levity was a real sense of pressure, awareness that every small misstep could have consequences. The dichotomy of laughter and tension became the unspoken rhythm of the morning, a rhythm that would set the stage for what Samira later described as a full-blown spectacle once the interview commenced. By mid-morning, the staff began to recognize a pattern. Meghan's requests, while detailed and sometimes unexpected, were executed with precision, observed carefully, and revised as necessary to achieve a visual narrative that aligned perfectly with her desired public image. Even minor adjustments had purpose, contributing to a larger design that only she fully understood. Samira, reflecting later, noted that this level of awareness and control was extraordinary, even intimidating. It wasn't simply about making demands. It was about orchestrating an environment where perception, image, and narrative were entirely in her hands. And yet, despite these red flags, there was no overt hostility. Meghan maintained a calm demeanor, her smiles and pauses projecting poise and relatability. The contrast between her composed exterior and the careful orchestration behind the scenes created a tension that was palpable. Staffers were simultaneously impressed, frustrated, and unsettled by the duality. They were witnessing a persona designed for the public eye while navigating the reality of backstage precision and control. Samira Nasser's shock, however, reached a crescendo when Meghan began to critique the placement of minor props and the flow of light in ways that disrupted the schedule but enhanced the visual storytelling. For an editor, the balance between control and collaboration is delicate. Too much interference risks damaging morale. Too little risks undermining the quality of the feature. Samira described these moments as a delicate dance, navigating the tightrope between maintaining authority and respecting the intentions of a high-profile subject. By the time filming was about to start, it was clear that this interview would not follow a conventional path. The red flags had accumulated, creating an environment charged with tension, anticipation, and subtle psychological interplay. Staffers prepared to execute every instruction with precision, editors braced for surprises, and Samira prepared herself for the unexpected, because she knew, even at this early stage, that what appeared as a simple interview would soon transform into something extraordinary, chaotic, and unforgettable. And just as the cameras were about to roll, one moment crystallized everything: the subtle shift in Meghan's expression, the almost imperceptible gesture that signaled the first real display of frustration, hinting at a backstage meltdown that no one could have predicted. The calm, polished exterior was about to crack, revealing layers of intensity, drama, and performance that would leave both the staff and the public stunned. What happened next would redefine the day and reveal truths behind Meghan's carefully curated image that would shock everyone who thought they knew the story. From personal assistance to camera angles, nothing was too small or too big. That was the sentiment echoed by multiple Harper's Bazaar staffers when recounting the day of Meghan Markle's interview. It was the kind of statement that, at first glance, sounds like exaggeration. But once you step into the behind-the-scenes reality, you realize it is a chillingly accurate description of the level of control and precision demanded by Meghan, an insistence on perfection that tested every ounce of patience, skill, and composure of those present. The first major diva demand came well before the interview officially began. Meghan requested that her seating position be altered, not just slightly, but down to the precise angle her body would appear on camera. She instructed the production crew to adjust the chair multiple times, then paused to check the light's reflection on her hair, shifting the chair again. A simple chair became a symbol of control, a minor piece of furniture transformed into a tool for narrative shaping. Each adjustment required a domino effect. Lighting rigs moved, cameras repositioned, sound technicians recalibrated microphones, and props on the table were subtly shifted to maintain aesthetic balance. Staff members later admitted that these small details, repeated over and over, became a source of both frustration and quiet awe. Next came wardrobe adjustments. Meghan's outfit, though carefully chosen by her stylist team, needed constant tweaking once she was on set. The sleeve on her blouse had to fall at an exact angle, the jewelry positioned to reflect light perfectly, and the color tones of her accessories subtly shifted to complement the backdrop. Every decision had to be approved not only by her stylist, but also subtly by Meghan herself. Samira Nasser recounted how even minute variations in clothing folds were scrutinized under bright studio lights, ensuring the final shot would meet the exact vision that had been curated for public consumption. Her demands weren't limited to visual details. Meghan reportedly requested a complete rearrangement of the interview questions multiple times, asserting that the phrasing should better reflect her narrative of bravery, relatability, and purpose. One observer described it as a rehearsal within a rehearsal, where the public-facing dialogue was just a fraction of the actual choreography taking place. Each question had to flow naturally, yet also serve as a strategic reinforcement of her persona. A delicate balancing act between casual charm and orchestrated messaging. Even the background elements became points of insistence. Meghan instructed staff to adjust the jars on a kitchen counter, shift the position of flowers, and ensure that light filtered through curtains at an exact angle. A small detail, like the tilt of a teacup or the orientation of a placemat, became essential to the visual narrative she wanted to craft. Staffers described standing in the background, quietly moving items repeatedly, aware that each correction was a test of both patience and attention to detail. What might seem trivial to an outsider was, in fact, a critical component of the image Meghan sought to project. The jam-making moment, touted publicly as an act of courage and domestic relatability, revealed further layers of diva demands. Meghan insisted on multiple takes for each step. Stirring, tasting, even the way she lifted a spoon to her lips. Each take was evaluated critically, with adjustments to lighting, camera focus, and even hand positioning. Observers noted that what was portrayed as spontaneous bravery on screen was actually a carefully constructed sequence designed to maximize visual impact. Every detail was choreographed, every action planned, and every nuance calibrated to ensure that the final product aligned perfectly with the narrative Meghan wished to convey. Staff interactions themselves became part of the controlled environment. Meghan issued instructions to assistants with a tone that combined casual conversation and implicit expectation. She would observe reactions, pause, and repeat or refine her requests until executed exactly as envisioned. Several team members described it as a blend of charm, quiet intimidation, and strategic oversight, an exercise in managing human behavior with subtle precision. The crew became adept at anticipating her needs, reading nonverbal cues, and executing adjustments before they were even requested. This level of influence, while impressive, also created tension and, at times, a sense of powerlessness. One particularly striking demand involved the timing of gestures and expressions. Meghan instructed the team on the exact moments to nod, smile, or look away during specific questions, all to create a specific emotional resonance. These micro-adjustments, imperceptible to the viewer, were essential to the polished image presented in the final interview. Staffers recalled feeling simultaneously amazed by the level of control and stressed by the continuous attention required. Even a minor lapse in timing or angle could compromise the intended effect, amplifying pressure on everyone in the room. Beyond the visual and performative demands, Meghan also sought to influence the interview's emotional tone. She requested that the interviewer, Samira Nasser, emphasize certain phrases or linger on specific topics. The goal was subtle but clear: reinforce her narrative of courage, resilience, and relatability, while maintaining an air of spontaneity. Staffers described this as a kind of invisible choreography, where every interaction, expression, and gesture was guided toward a specific public perception. It was a calculated effort to craft a story that was both compelling and strategically aligned with her personal brand. Even breaks and pauses were subject to her control. Meghan would dictate when and how staff could step away, subtly reminding the crew to maintain composure, posture, and attentiveness during every moment. Observers noted the paradoxical effect: a performance meant to appear relaxed and candid, yet tightly controlled behind the scenes. Staffers struggled to reconcile the contrast between the public narrative of casual warmth and the backstage reality of meticulous orchestration. What made these demands particularly striking was their cumulative effect. Each individual request, adjustment, or instruction might seem manageable, even reasonable. Taken together, however, they created an atmosphere of intense scrutiny and constant adaptation. Staffers were constantly on edge, balancing professionalism with the need to accommodate a high-profile figure whose expectations were exacting and often unpredictable. Samira Nasser, in particular, faced the challenge of ensuring that editorial integrity was preserved, while also executing a vision that was partially dictated by the subject herself. The staff also observed a pattern in Meghan's behavior that highlighted both strategic calculation and emotional intensity. She would issue instructions with measured calm, then pause to observe the environment, occasionally expressing subtle frustration if her vision was not immediately realized. It was a form of controlled intensity that reinforced her authority while maintaining the appearance of composure. The duality was remarkable. Public poise intertwined with backstage assertiveness, creating an intricate balance that only those present could fully appreciate. One especially memorable demand involved the placement of a reflective surface to catch light at precisely the right angle, enhancing both her features and the ambience. Staffers worked in near silence, repositioning equipment while aware that any misalignment could compromise the shot. It was a level of attention to detail rarely seen outside high-budget productions, and yet it was executed as part of what was presented to the public as an intimate, casual interview. Humor mixed with disbelief. How could such meticulous effort be required for a single, seemingly simple magazine segment? The cumulative effect of these demands was clear. The public would see only a polished, graceful, and relatable Meghan Markle, while the staff experienced an environment of precision, pressure, and subtle tension. Every adjustment, every instruction, every micro-movement contributed to a controlled narrative that was carefully orchestrated from beginning to end. Samira Nasser later described it as both impressive and exhausting, a demonstration of meticulous planning and performance that blurred the lines between personal expression and strategic image-making. And yet, even with all these carefully executed demands, the real drama had not yet begun. The day, already filled with tension, was on the brink of revealing its most shocking moments. The first real displays of frustration, the subtle meltdown that would leave the team questioning what they thought they knew about celebrity composure, and the orchestrated spectacle that would become the defining behind-the-scenes story. But what came next, the actual moment when frustration met performance, would transform the interview into something far beyond what anyone, staff or public alike, could have anticipated. The calm, composed surface was about to crack, exposing layers of control, theatrics, and intensity that would shock everyone involved. A simple jar of jam became the scene of a royal-level spectacle. That sentence, as dramatic as it sounds, barely captures the tension, precision, and, ultimately, chaos that unfolded during what was publicly portrayed as a charming, relatable moment. To the outside world, Meghan Markle's jam-making segment in the Harper's Bazaar interview seemed quaint, almost endearing. A duchess rolling up her sleeves and performing a domestic act with grace and humility. But behind the camera, the story was far more complex, far more controlled, and far more revealing of the diva demands that had begun hours before. It all started with the setup. The kitchen area chosen for the segment had been meticulously arranged to convey warmth, intimacy, and elegance. Lighting was carefully calibrated to highlight Meghan's features without creating shadows. Every reflective surface was strategically placed. Every utensil and ingredient was positioned with intent. The staff had already spent hours adjusting minor details in preparation for the cameras. Chairs had been moved multiple times, the table's angle had been subtly shifted, and props such as teacups and fruit bowls had been rearranged to achieve a perfectly balanced composition. Yet, even with this careful preparation, Meghan wasn't satisfied. Her first instruction involved the placement of the jam jars. Staffers recount that she insisted each jar be turned to a precise angle, so the labels faced the camera just so. It might seem trivial, but in this environment, precision mattered enormously. One misaligned jar could disrupt the visual symmetry, undermining the carefully curated aesthetic. Multiple takes were required, with assistants repositioning jars repeatedly under Meghan's watchful eye. Observers noted that her attention to detail was extraordinary, not simply because she cared about appearances, but because she wanted to control the narrative at every stage. Once the jars were aligned, Meghan focused on the act itself, stirring, scooping, and tasting the jam. Publicly, it appeared effortless. She smiled, paused for reflective glances, and engaged the camera with warmth and relatability. Behind the scenes, however, each action was orchestrated. Staffers had to time the camera angles precisely to capture her gestures, adjust lighting between takes, and ensure that sound levels captured the faintest scrape of a spoon against a jar. Meghan directed subtle changes in her posture, the tilt of her wrist, and even the speed at which she stirred, insisting that it align with her desired image. One particularly striking moment involved the tasting. In the published interview, it seemed spontaneous, a casual acknowledgement of flavor. In reality, multiple takes were executed, with slight variations in expression and gesture. Staffers described how Meghan would taste, pause, reset, and taste again, each time refining her performance for maximum impact. The repeated takes created quiet frustration among the crew, who were tasked with maintaining composure while adjusting cameras, lighting, and props. What appeared casual to viewers required hours of behind-the-scenes precision. Humor often punctuated these moments, even amid tension. One assistant whispered about the tyranny of the teaspoon, noting how a single utensil's position was scrutinized for longer than some actual interviews lasted. Staffers joked quietly about the absurdity of the meticulousness, while maintaining professionalism in front of the cameras. It was a paradox. The scene was designed to be lighthearted and relatable, yet producing that image demanded an almost obsessive level of control. The duality of public versus private behavior became more pronounced when Meghan's mood shifted subtly between takes. Staffers noticed micro-expressions, slight tightening of the jaw, a quick sigh, a raised eyebrow, that suggested impatience or frustration. These moments were fleeting, often unnoticed by the cameras, but they contributed to the staff's growing awareness that this was no ordinary interview. What the public saw was grace and composure. What the staff experienced was a carefully managed performance punctuated by exacting demands and subtle emotional cues. Even small, seemingly insignificant props became points of contention. One minor detail, a folded napkin beside a jar, prompted a series of adjustments after Meghan requested it be positioned just so. Observers later recalled the repetition: move it an inch left, then back, then slightly closer to the jar. Each adjustment required recalibration of the surrounding elements to maintain visual harmony. These moments became emblematic of the overarching pattern. Nothing was left to chance. Every action, gesture, and detail was calculated to reinforce the narrative Meghan intended to project. Samira Nasser, observing this unfolding scene, later reflected on the balance between awe and exasperation. On one hand, she acknowledged the extraordinary precision and vision. Meghan's ability to conceptualize the final image and ensure every detail contributed to it was impressive, almost masterful. On the other hand, the intensity of demands, repeated takes, and micro-adjustments created pressure, testing the patience and endurance of every staff member in the room. The editor-in-chief described moments of internal struggle: maintain calm professionalism, satisfy the subject, and preserve the integrity of the editorial process, all simultaneously. The tension escalated further when Meghan's focus shifted to timing. Staffers noted that she was highly aware of pacing, instructing pauses, gestures, and expressions in exact synchronization with camera movements. The smallest deviations, a hand lifted a fraction too early, a glance in the wrong direction, prompted subtle corrections and retakes. Humor, again, punctuated these moments as staffers shared quiet jokes about jam choreography and the art of perfect stirring. Yet the stress of continuous precision was palpable, creating a charged atmosphere that underscored the complexity behind even the most seemingly casual acts. Beyond the physical elements, Meghan's interactions with staff reflected a combination of charm, authority, and quiet intensity. Requests were often framed as casual suggestions, yet carried implicit expectation. Staffers described the subtle psychological aspect: anticipate her needs, adjust before she notices, and maintain awareness of her gaze, posture, and subtle emotional cues. The duality of being both impressed and exasperated became a defining rhythm of the morning. Every take, every adjustment, every micro-detail was a lesson in control, performance, and human behavior under pressure. The culmination of these demands became apparent in the final take of the jam-making scene. Meghan's performance, polished and seemingly effortless, masked the hours of meticulous preparation, repeated takes, and detailed instructions that had led to it. Staffers reflected on the paradox. What appeared spontaneous and charming on screen had been the product of precise, controlled orchestration, executed with quiet intensity. Humor, irony, frustration, and admiration all coexisted in that room, a silent testament to the complexity behind the image projected to the public. And yet, even after the jam-making scene concluded, tension lingered. Staffers sensed that what had transpired was only a prelude to the next wave of demands and orchestrated moments. Meghan's ability to combine charm, authority, and meticulous control meant that every action had the potential to shift the dynamic in unexpected ways. The calm surface of the interview was deceptive. The stage was set for moments of emotional intensity and subtle drama that would define the narrative behind the scenes. But what came next? The first true signs of Meghan's frustration and a subtle backstage meltdown would reveal just how far the public-facing image diverged from the reality of the production. The jam, though now completed, had set the stage for a series of events that would shock even the most seasoned professionals in the room. Once the cameras started, the pressure exploded. That simple statement, as understated as it seems, doesn't begin to capture the intensity of what occurred the moment the red recording light blinked on. The calm, meticulously arranged set that had consumed hours of preparation instantly transformed into a pressure cooker of precision, expectation, and subtle psychological tension. For staff, editors, and Meghan alike, what had been hours of staging and anticipation now demanded flawless execution under the watchful eye of the lens. The first challenge appeared almost immediately. With the cameras rolling, Meghan's awareness of perception became palpable. Every movement, glance, and gesture was measured, rehearsed, and re-evaluated in real time. Staffers reported moments where the smallest discrepancies, a slightly tilted jar, a minor shadow across her sleeve, prompted immediate intervention. A director would subtly reposition the camera, a lighting technician would shift reflectors, and assistants would adjust props, all while maintaining the illusion that everything was effortlessly spontaneous. Samira Nasser observed all of this with a mix of fascination and exasperation. The editor-in-chief, used to orchestrating high-profile interviews, had never witnessed this degree of simultaneous control over environment, narrative, and emotional tone. What made it particularly challenging was Meghan's ability to convey warmth, relatability, and composure on screen while exercising precise control off-camera. The dichotomy created a tension that hung over the room like a taut wire, demanding constant attention and mental agility from every member of the crew. Then came the subtle shifts in Meghan's demeanor, small signs of impatience or frustration that were invisible to the camera but noticed by staff. A quick sigh, a furrowed brow, a slightly sharper instruction. These micro-expressions revealed cracks in the veneer of calm composure. Crew members reported that these small cues carried immense weight. They had to respond immediately and intuitively, anticipating needs before they were explicitly voiced. The atmosphere became electric, charged with both admiration for her precision and anxiety over maintaining flawless execution. One of the most significant moments occurred during a retake of a particular jam-stirring shot. Meghan, perfectly poised on camera, paused and requested the take be repeated, not due to error, but to perfect the emotional resonance of her expression. Staffers described the sequence as almost ritualistic, a meticulous choreography where timing, hand movement, eye contact, and camera angle all had to align. Each repetition brought subtle refinements, creating an escalating sense of pressure on the crew. Humor and disbelief emerged in whispered commentary. "We're not stirring jam, we're performing a ballet." But there was no relief from the intensity. The tension was not limited to physical staging. Editorial considerations added another layer of complexity. Meghan had specific expectations for how certain phrases and stories would be presented. Questions had to be phrased in a particular way, answers had to highlight her personal narrative of bravery and resilience, and even pauses had to be timed to maximize emotional impact. Samira Nasser found herself simultaneously guiding the editorial flow, ensuring the narrative made sense, and accommodating a celebrity whose expectations constantly evolved. The cognitive load was immense, requiring constant recalibration of both logistics and psychology. At the same time, small moments of human error created subtle ripple effects. A lighting technician shifted a reflector slightly off angle, prompting a quick correction. An assistant accidentally bumped a prop, causing Meghan to pause mid-shot. Each of these minor disturbances amplified tension, highlighting the fragility of the carefully constructed performance. Staffers reported that even minor distractions felt magnified under Meghan's scrutiny, creating an environment of continuous high alert. Humor, once again, served as a coping mechanism. Staffers whispered jokes, exchanged knowing glances, and quietly acknowledged the absurdity of orchestrating a relatable domestic scene with the intensity of a high-budget theatrical production. Yet these small moments of levity did little to diminish the underlying pressure. The stakes were clear. Flawless execution was non-negotiable, and the gap between public perception and backstage reality had never been wider. Another critical factor was Meghan's real-time monitoring of her own performance. Observers noted that she would frequently pause to review gestures, expressions, and camera angles, sometimes requesting adjustments to maintain perfect alignment with her intended narrative. This self-awareness, combined with precise control over staff, amplified tension and created an environment where every movement had consequences. Crew members had to anticipate her needs while simultaneously executing complex technical tasks, a delicate balance that tested both skill and composure. The staff also witnessed subtle psychological dynamics unfold. Meghan's calm exterior, combined with assertive directives, created a blend of admiration and intimidation. On one hand, they marveled at her ability to maintain poise while controlling so many variables. On the other, they felt the weight of expectations, aware that any deviation could disrupt the carefully curated image. This tension, invisible to the public eye, added layers of complexity to what appeared on camera as effortless charm. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of this stage was how it exposed the duality of public persona versus private control. On camera, Meghan radiated warmth, relatability, and confidence. Behind the camera, she exerted exacting authority, meticulously refining details, and subtly influencing behavior. Staffers described it as a dance of perception, where every gesture, adjustment, and correction served to reinforce the narrative she wanted to project. The contrast between the two realities was stark, creating both fascination and exhaustion among those involved. By mid-interview, the pressure reached a peak. Minor errors in positioning or timing prompted immediate corrections, escalating the intensity of the environment. Staffers described holding their breath during certain sequences, aware that even the smallest lapse could require repetition or adjustment. Humor and whispered commentary persisted, but were interwoven with a pervasive sense of tension. Every action, movement, and expression became a test of precision, patience, and professionalism. And then came a moment that would define the interview, a subtle but unmistakable display of frustration. Meghan, poised and smiling on camera, adjusted a prop for the third time in a sequence that had already taken multiple takes. Her expression hardened slightly, a micro-tension in her jaw, and her voice, though calm, carried a sharper edge in its phrasing. Staffers felt a ripple of unease. Even the most experienced professionals sensed the intensity behind the veneer. It was a small crack in the polished exterior, a signal that the carefully choreographed environment was reaching a tipping point. This was the first real glimpse of the backstage tension that would later be described as a meltdown by Samira Nasr. The calm, polished narrative that the public would later consume masked a carefully orchestrated struggle of control, patience, and performance. Every adjustment, every command, every micro-expression contributed to a complex web of perception and influence, and the team was acutely aware that the next moments could escalate even further. But what came next? The full unfolding of backstage intensity, subtle confrontations, and orchestrated theatrics would take the interview into a territory that no one in that room, including Samira Nasr, had ever encountered before. The surface calm was about to shatter, revealing layers of diva behavior, strategic control, and unexpected drama that would define the story for weeks to come. Did Meghan actually write parts of her own questions? That question lingered in the minds of staff as the interview progressed, and according to multiple sources, the answer was far more complicated and controlling than anyone anticipated. The Harper's Bazaar interview was billed as a casual, intimate conversation designed to provide a glimpse into Meghan Markle's personal life. Publicly, it appeared effortless. Thoughtful responses, reflective pauses, and carefully crafted insights into her personal values and experiences. Behind the scenes, however, the narrative was anything but spontaneous. From the moment the first questions were posed, it became apparent that Meghan had significant influence over both phrasing and direction. She would pause mid-answer, request minor changes to the wording, and occasionally interject with clarifications designed to ensure that her intended message was conveyed exactly. Staffers described a delicate balance. Questions had to appear natural and conversational, yet simultaneously reinforce the narrative Meghan wanted to project. One of bravery, relatability, and subtle triumph over adversity. One particularly striking moment involved a discussion about her recent projects and public appearances. Meghan paused to request that a phrase referencing her brave life choices be adjusted to include a subtle emphasis on independence. This required the interviewer to rephrase the question in real time, a process that was repeated multiple times until Meghan was satisfied with the nuance of the wording. Observers noted that these adjustments, while minor on the surface, created a chain reaction. Staff repositioned cameras, recalibrated lighting to match her expressions, and subtly guided her gestures to align with the revised phrasing. The influence extended beyond individual answers. Meghan reportedly provided input on the sequence of questions, suggesting which topics should follow one another to create a narrative arc that highlighted resilience and personal growth. This level of control required constant vigilance from the production team, who had to maintain the illusion of spontaneity while executing a highly curated plan. Samira Nasr later described this as a balancing act that tested editorial integrity, allowed too much influence, and the interview risked becoming a personal PR exercise, resist, and risk conflict or disruption. Even small nuances were carefully managed. Meghan monitored tone, pace, and emphasis, instructing subtle adjustments to ensure that each response conveyed exactly the emotion she intended. Staffers reported that a slight hesitation in phrasing could trigger a request for repetition, a pause in speech could be extended, and gestures could be altered to align with her preferred image. The level of detail was extraordinary, turning a seemingly casual conversation into a meticulously choreographed performance. Humor and irony emerged in quiet moments. Staffers whispered about interview gymnastics and the repeated fine-tuning of phrases, while maintaining the professional facade expected in front of a celebrity. Yet beneath the humor was a palpable tension. Every adjustment carried weight, and failure to comply could disrupt both the flow of the interview and Meghan's carefully constructed narrative. Samira observed these dynamics closely, noting how even the most trivial-seeming change could have a significant impact on the story being presented. The script's control extended to emotional tone as well. Meghan requested subtle guidance on how laughter, reflection, or emphasis should be expressed in specific moments. These micro-adjustments influenced the rhythm and impact of the interview, ensuring that it resonated emotionally with the audience. Staffers described it as a performance of control within a performance. The public-facing interview conveyed natural charm, while the behind-the-scenes orchestration ensured that each moment aligned with Meghan's personal brand. Even when addressing seemingly mundane topics, the degree of control was striking. During a segment discussing daily routines, Meghan requested adjustments to how certain words were delivered, how pauses were timed, and even how hand gestures accompanied her responses. Each modification, while minor individually, cumulatively shaped the interview into a narrative that was carefully aligned with her desired public persona. Staffers quietly acknowledged the precision required, often marveling at the subtlety and effectiveness of these interventions. The interviewer, Samira Nasser, faced a unique challenge. While experienced in managing high-profile personalities, she had to navigate Meghan's input without undermining her own role or the editorial integrity of the feature.